Hello, this is Don Mitchell, here to speak with you again about the 2000% solution, the way that anyone can improve virtually any activity by 20 times while spending the same or less time, money, and effort. In this case, we're going to be discussing a stall, a bad habit that prevents many people from accomplishing 2000% solutions. In this case, the stall is what I call the disbelief stall, which is discounting new information, new technology, or new ways of operating that already exist. While in the 2000% solution, we cite many examples that cause all of us to laugh about the foolishness of people in the past, is probably going to be far more valuable to you if I talk about some of the things that exist today that you and others may be ignoring that would have enormous benefits. As an example, I think I have to point to the instance of history. When I first began working on the 400-year project in 1995, I was aware of something from my historical studies at Harvard University and elsewhere, in which I identified that the average length of time before a new idea that could be immediately implemented was in fact in widespread application around the world was approximately 400 years. Now, while that was certainly true historically, you may be thinking, well, with today's internet, cell phones, and how well educated so many people are, surely that slowdown is no longer the case. Well, unfortunately, it still is the case. So, for whatever reason, the disbelief stall is alive and well and causing all kinds of difficulties throughout the world. So what this means is that in the year 1617, 400 years ago, the ideas that were in place still haven't been implemented broadly around the world in ways that they could be beneficial. An example of that, I think, is well understood, is that crop rotation had been identified by then as a way to naturally improve the productivity of land by putting different crops on the same land year after year, and also leaving the land fallow. In other words, not planting every so often so that the nutrients would have a chance to build up in the soil through what were then unknown biological processes, which are still with us today. As we look forward into the future, we might then look at what is it that is around today that hardly anyone is using. Well, I think the 2000% solution is a good example. This has been well documented now for almost 20 years and has been presented to hundreds of thousands of people. And yet, to my knowledge, there are really only a few dozens of people around the world who routinely apply the process to make such breakthrough improvements. And you might say, well, what does that matter, Don? Why is that an important thing? Unless I turn this into an argument in favor of increasing my commercial success, let me simply point out that the implications for humanity are far more significant than they are for me. Although many people would like to eliminate poverty, would like to be sure everyone has enough food, would like to be sure everyone has clean water, and people have enough medicine and the right kind of medical care and so forth, the 2000% solution could really solve all of those problems within the next year or two. However, people would have to abandon what they do today. For example, I receive hundreds of communications each year in which people explain to me what it is that they want to do to solve each of these problems. And as I look at their solutions, I can immediately appreciate that the solutions will, at most, perhaps improve worldwide circumstances by some small fraction of 1% over the next 10 years. So in other words, if we kept doing these things for several centuries, at some point they would add up. But in the near term, they're going to be really insignificant. So I think what's happened here is that people have equated if they're working on something that makes them feel good and excited about working on something important, that in fact that is adequate for creating a great solution. And in most cases, what you find is that people have not even looked around to consider what other good solutions might be available. And I see that really all the time where people will tell me that they've concluded that there is no better approach, and yet the approach that they're using is one that most organizations abandoned, back in 1943. So, in terms of this, I think we have some very substantial opportunities, and one of the benefits of a process like the 2000% solution is it requires people to become better informed about what, in fact, is being accomplished, what is being achieved by people using different approaches. And one of the key things that many people don't appreciate is that people are so little curious in this regard that if they do discover something that is a better process, they usually stop looking. Now, there might well be 7 other processes that could be operated in tandem or in parallel to the one that they've just identified. If you put them all together, you might create 100, 200, 300 times the results of what they have just identified. So, in a sense, people are so used to the idea that what they do is ineffective. Let me repeat that. They're so used to the idea that what they do is ineffective, it never occurs to them that something that might be 20, 40, 400, 800, 8,000, 3,000, whatever it might be, times more successful would be present, even when it stares them in the face. As an example of this, I sent out a letter a number of years ago to thousands of companies, inviting them to share with me their most productive practice and how much it had improved over what they had done previously. And the result was going to be worldwide publicity for why this is a well-run company. Well, as you can imagine, managers and executives love to be praised for having done something well, and I expected to receive back hundreds of examples of breakthrough improvements. I did not receive any, but I did receive hundreds of letters saying that, oh, we've never had that experience. Now, lest you think that this is unusual, let me relate a little anecdote of an experience I had about 25 years ago. I was a part of a panel discussion along with about 20 other people, most of whom were executives at well recognized, highly regarded companies. And the subject matter was by how much costs could be reduced to operate existing businesses. And in response to my comment about how rapid improvements could be made and were routinely made in certain industries, such as the electronics industry, computer industry, information processing industry, and so forth, everyone in the room basically disagreed with me and said that I was making it up, that was really not true. And when I cited examples that they had all seen, they denied that those examples existed. So I think that part of what's involved here in disbelief is an element of personal pride. People want to have a high opinion of themselves. And one of the ways that they can have a high opinion of themselves is by lowering the possibilities of what can be done by others. I well remember a client I had about 35 years ago. It was a very well-run company, and I was talking to them about the methods that they used to create good results. And one of the executives explained that the method involved was as soon as they identified an improvement that would get them more sales, would reduce costs, or otherwise enable them to price their products more highly, they were very careful to make this available to their customers in a slow fashion, because otherwise they would have great results one year and then wouldn't be able to repeat the process the second year. So they rather so to give the impression that they're always being innovative and doing a great job, they would perhaps take 8 to 12 years to make this thing available. So in fact, their way of building up their pride and their ego was to demonstrate slower progress than even they know how to do. We see the familiar characteristic of this in the budget setting methods of many organizations. When it's time to set the budget, everybody wants a low target except the boss. The reason what a low target is your chance of getting promoted, your bonus, other kinds of means of recognition all relate to how you perform versus budget. So obviously, if you can bring down the budget target to a very low level, then it's going to be easy to look good. Whereas if it's at a high level and you miss it by a little bit, you'll be viewed as a failure, even though in fact you've accomplished a great deal more. So it's a little bit like the politicians out there. Once they're in office, they'll talk about the difficulties of making change. When they're running for office, they'll talk about the incompetence of the incumbents who really don't get anything done. So people are really very easily satisfied. There's been well recognized research on this, which demonstrates that human beings generally are more concerned about not losing a benefit they think they have already or should easily accomplish than they are in gaining more. And I think as a recent example I saw of this is a very energetic man who's interested in the 400-year project has been doing great work in the country in terms of sharing important lessons about what can be done to improve the effectiveness of people there. Now, in sharing these lessons, he had, however, neglected to apply those lessons to his own life. And so every so often, I would get, a letter asking me for some money to solve some problem he had. And I would send him back a note saying, well, I've given you the materials and the instruction for you to solve your own problem, and you wouldn't need to ask me for money. I'll be glad to give you advice about how to apply that. And also, I arranged for a local, teacher who was very good at these methods, very good at explaining them, to work with him. And he, for a long time, refused to even talk to this local teacher. Well, eventually, he went and talked to the local teacher, and the local teacher solved his problem very, very quickly. And he was then able to proceed. But there was just a tremendous barrier. He just couldn't believe that the reason that he didn't have enough money was because of what he was choosing to do, not because of anything else. So there's an element of personal responsibility involved here. So if we want to have better results, we have to take the responsibility to find those better results. And there is always a way to do it. In fact, in most cases, there are probably hundreds of ways to do it. But we have to be out actively seeking them. Of course, it's much easier to go around and do what one of my clients did. For about 30 years, they discovered that they could redesign all of their consumer products once a year. And by reducing the number of parts, using less expensive materials that were more durable, and other simplifications, they could bring down the cost of making those items by approximately 5% a year. And in many cases, they could add then functionality that would make these even more desirable. They could then charge somewhat less and still expand market. Well, they love doing this so much that it never occurred to them, well, why don't you just do the redesign that you would normally do 15 years from now and create a whole new types of products, ones that would be incredibly functional in new ways and would sell for a much lower price today, but would actually yield more profit. That thought, even though it was perfectly obvious from their potential, really never occurred to them. So, who has the disbelief stall? You have the disbelief stall. And who else has the disbelief stall? I have the disbelief stall. As an example, I had been encouraged by Peter Drucker for many years to make the lessons of the 2000% solution available in a much simpler, less expensive form. And he had said a few people are going to read books. They just don't read books. And a few people are going to apply books. And he said I should write articles. So I went out and did that. Well, of course, technology has changed since then. So it's actually easier to create a video, such as the one you're watching, than it is to actually write an article. And I didn't do that. And then after much chiding by many people who taught me that I should be making these videos, I'm finally doing it. But, I could have been doing this a long time ago. So I'm guilty of this as well. So I'll say goodbye for now and look forward to having you come back to learn more about the various stalls that keep people from being at least 20 times more productive. Goodbye for now. Take care.